I should say that my focus is British patriotism and national identity, very much more than English or Scottish or Welsh or Irish. And I start from the premise that of the four historical traditional pillars of British identity, the Empire, Protestantism, which we've just heard very eloquently about, I think, from Joe, the Parliamentary Union of England, Wales and Scotland, and the monarchy, then it is the monarchy that has eroded least. Indeed, in some ways, it's certainly the most buoyant. The Empire has gone. Protestantism is dying. I've just actually been asked to write a book called The Strange Death of Protestant Britain. And the Parliamentary Union of England, Wales and Scotland, as we know, is under very severe threat and quite likely to disappear. But the monarchy is actually more buoyant now, certainly if you take polls, than it has been any time in the last 30 years, and is the institution of those four traditional pillars of Britishness, which is undoubtedly, I think, in the best health. The monarchy is also still a hugely potent icon of British identity. A recent poll of school teachers and pupils rated it second only to the Union flag in terms of the symbols most associated with Britain. In another recent survey, Germans aged between 16 and 25 singled out the English language, multiculturalism and the monarchy as the aspects of Britain which they most admire. I don't think the monarchy would get quite such a high vote of confidence among young Britons, but it's interesting that among Germans, the language, multiculturalism and the monarchy are the three aspects of Britain that they most admire. The fact remains that more than anyone else, the Queen personifies and exemplifies British identity, something that of course has been reinforced in the new naturalisation ceremonies, where the act of swearing eternal loyalty to the Queen officially imparts British citizenship. That is what actually makes you a British citizen, swearing allegiance to the Queen. The new citizenship ceremonies, of course, also accord a very central role to the national anthem, which if you were my class in St Andrews you would now stand up and sing, but I'll spare you that. And of course it's unique among the national anthems of the world in focusing attention on the ruler of a country and personality rather than on its land or its people. And it further underlines the extent to which the person of the monarch embodies and expresses British identity. For its critics, of course, the monarchy sums up what is worst about Britishness, its stuffiness, its rootedness in the past. Jeremy Paxman, in his book about the English, dismisses the monarchy as primped and planned and pompous. It's very interesting that Paxo has undergone a considerable conversion experience. Those of you who know his book on the English, he's highly critical of the monarchy. Those of you who know his book on royalty, published about 2004 or 5, he completely changes his tune, and it's one of the most sensitive pro-monarchical books to have come out over the last 10 years. I think it represents an extremely interesting shift among the chattering classes in favour of the monarchy, but Paxo's book on royalty, which also acknowledges the spiritual heart of the monarchy in a very interesting way, represents a shift. But certainly in his older incarnation, writing about the English, Paxman embodied that kind of sense that the monarchy, Britishness, is all about outdated pomp. Billy Bragg, in his wonderful Millennium anthem, Take Down the Union Jack, it clashes with the sunset, which we would also sing if you were my St Andrews class, has the wonderful lines, is this the 19th century that I'm watching on TV, the dear old Queen of England handing out those MBEs. And significant, of course, that Bragg refers to the Queen of England, because polls consistently show the monarchy is markedly more popular in England than in Scotland or Wales. A YouGov poll last month found that just 41% of Scots and only 35% of Welsh said that the Queen made them proud of their national identity, compared to 80% of English respondents. The Scotsman made this a front page story just a couple of weeks ago. Scots snub Queen as symbol of national identity. Jubilee setback for monarch as poll reveals north-south pride divide. Now, Doug may well be saying more about this, but I mean, I think we take it as read, of course, that there is considerably more support for the Queen in England than in either Scotland or Wales. Unionists in Northern Ireland, of course, have their own deep and particular love affair with the Crown, although even there, of course, they've had to put up with recent efforts to downplay its significance, the renaming of the Royal Ulster Constabulary as the Northern Ireland Police Service. The monarchy is undoubtedly associated and equated with Britishness, and therefore with unionism among Scottish and Welsh and Irish nationalists, who therefore tend more towards republicanism, although it is, of course, fascinating that Alex Salmond has consistently said that he would have the Queen of Scots, to give her title, in an independent Scotland. And I find this extremely interesting. I've written a lot about this. But there is a very interesting, and Salmond is nothing if not a very astute politician with his ear to the ground. It's very interesting, I think, that the SNP, which has, of course, a Republican tendency, but in terms of its leadership, is saying that an independent Scotland would keep the Queen. In terms of its historical descent, the monarchy encapsulates the hybrid, perichoretic nature of British identity. The Queen, of course, can trace her lineage back through the Germanic, Gothic Windsors and Hanoverians, through the Scottish Stuarts, the Welsh Tudors, and the Anglo-Norman Plantagenets, to the Saxon Alfred and the wonderfully mythical and, of course, hugely resonant and important figure for British identity, King Arthur. Now, my book, which has already been plugged, and I will even more shamelessly plug it and say I've got copies available for you to buy at a reduced rate, but my book explores the question of how far the monarchy can still articulate and represent and embody British identity and values, especially in the areas of faith and belief. I think it's first very important to note the fact that the United Kingdom is organised and governed not around ethnicity or nationalism or some abstract political principle like liberté or égalité or fraternité, but rather around a dynasty. And I think this has a very significant bearing on national identity. Allegiance to the monarch may not be a major factor in how the British see themselves nowadays, although we've just noted it is the key to becoming a British citizen. But bizarrely, of course, this is because monarchy makes the British subjects rather than citizens, and in some people's eyes weakens the hold of citizenship in the United Kingdom. But in all sorts of subtle and subconscious ways, monarchy still deeply informs what it is to be British. The presence of the monarch is critical, central at those great national occasions which come closest to expressing a shared collective sense of British identity. We've already been reminded about the growing significance of Remembrance Day celebrations, and I think any of us who conduct Remembrance Day services would absolutely echo what's been said about the way they have become more and more important, not least among young people, and of course the whole way in which the 2-minute silence on November the 11th has hugely grown, not least because young people want to celebrate it. The ceremonies to commemorate significant national anniversaries and events following tragedies and indeed happy occasions all involve the monarch at their centre and all take place in the context of religious services. I mean, I've done a lot of work on this, the way, in terms of her appearances on television screens, the Queen is very often seen in a church, often kneeling in a church. There are, of course, all the other occasions at Sandringham, at Crathie, at Windsor, where she's, of course, a far more regular churchgoer than almost any of her subjects. But they all revolve around church appearances. And the faith context is hugely important. And of course, it's increasingly, for the Queen, an interfaith context. Highly significant, I think, that her first public engagement in this Jubilee year was at an interfaith service in Leicester. Some of you will have seen the very interesting ComRes poll which appeared just this week. I saw it in yesterday's Church Times, which shows really staggeringly, I think, that 79% of the population, and this was a poll taken right across the UK, 79% believe that the Queen still has an important role to play in the faith life of the nation, and 75% believe she should keep, and indeed her successor should keep, the titles of Supreme Governor of the Church of England and Defender of the Faith. Other more contemporary expressions, I think, of our rainbow identity now in Britain show that the monarchy may also, I think, be central in the multicultural, multi-ethnic reconfiguration of British patriotism and pageantry. I think what it can offer was demonstrated very strongly for me, and I think for others, in the 5,000-strong gospel choir led by the wonderful Pate Boulay, the Nigerian-born singer, which danced and sang its way down the Mall as part of the parade for the Queen's last Jubilee, the Golden Jubilee celebrations on the 4th of June 2002, where the predominantly black choir drawn from Pentecostal, Apostolic, Methodist and Catholic churches, with the members of the Metropolitan Police Gospel Choir in the front row, sang Pate Boulay's own specially written Jubilee anthem, "Come Celebrate Good News," with its message, "It's been so long since we felt so strong," alongside other gospel standards. And these upbeat gospel numbers seemed to catch the mood of the day and the imagination of the crowd more than the traditional national airs played by military bands. One of my own most abiding memories of the Jubilee celebrations 10 years ago was of seeing pearly kings and queens dancing in front of Buckingham Palace to the black gospel songs being belted out by the Kingdom Choir, with members of the Treorchy male voice choir enthusiastically joining in. Here was a Britishness which infused and embraced Cockneys, Welshmen, a black-led Britishness, not quite of Paul Gilroy's urban, streetwise convivial culture, but a black culture of carnival, of revivalist Christianity, and of fervent monarchism, colourful, happy, and exuberant. The whole emphasis of those Jubilee celebrations 10 years ago, and I hope it's going to be true next month, but I'm not quite sure it is going to be quite so true, and we might wonder why, was on carnival, and it was very heavily tilted towards ethnic minorities. You may remember the first parade down the Mall was a Notting Hill carnival, and the last was a Commonwealth parade with 4 rainbow arches containing wishes sent in by children from every country in the Commonwealth. Both of these parades were largely made up of recent Commonwealth immigrants to the United Kingdom. The Commonwealth, which is so often, I think, underplayed in constructions of Britishness, played a very significant role in those 2002 Jubilee celebrations, appropriately, of course, for a monarch who's done so much to promote the Commonwealth and its values. And so also, more generally, did black and Asian Britons. This aspect of the Jubilee celebrations, I think, has been little picked up and commented on, although it was mentioned by Matthew Ancona in his contribution to the 2002 foreign policy booklet, Reclaiming Britishness, where he said the parade on the Mall was a sparkling celebration of British pluralism, a pageant which paid tribute to the profound role that immigration from the Commonwealth has played in the evolution of patriotism in this country over the past half-century. The gospel choir, the Bollywood performers, the Notting Hill Carnival dancers were all vibrant proof that those who would pit traditional Britishness against its modern variant miss the point completely. The Jubilee revealed a sense of nationhood which is not embattled and defensive, but porous, adaptable and confident. And I think it may well be that black and Asian Britons are helping white Britons to celebrate the monarchy with more enthusiasm, just as, of course, they're also encouraging them or us to affirm other traditional aspects of our heritage. I write a lot about this, but many of you will know about the way in which both black and Asian Britons claim that we have hollowed out British identity, whites have, and want very much to affirm a lot of very traditional aspects of what we would see as British identity. So how far can the monarchy embody feelings of shared identity and patriotism. I think John Hapgood, when he was Archbishop of York in 1983, made an interesting observation when he said that there's not a single free nation in the world which has managed to hold a pluralist society together without some very powerful unifying factor. In Britain, we used to have a whole network of such factors, mostly linked in some way to the church and the crown. One of the effects of the decline of the national role of the church has been to isolate the crown as almost the only effective symbol of national unity, and others have said this, but I think he puts it well. Sadly, the ability of the crown to provide this symbolic unity has been eroded in recent decades, particularly, I think, by a relentless campaign of degradation in the media led by the Murdoch press. To me, what the Murdoch press has done to the monarchy is almost as bad as the whole recent phone hacking scandal, and also, one would have to say, of course, by some spectacular own goals on the part of certain members of the royal family and their advisors. But I think the monarchy still has the capacity to promote shared feels of patriotism. One way it does this is by emphasizing the communal over against the individualistic. Writing about the development of sacred kingship, the sociologist Werner Stark, who will be well known to many of you, observed that societies in which the monarchical religion flourished were by and large communities. They were unities rather than diversities. They were collectivist rather than individualistic. The whole came before the parts. This collectivism, this primacy of the whole, needed to be made visible, to be symbolized, and its visible image, its commanding symbol, was the sacred king. And Stark goes on to say that societies that ditched their monarchs, or societies ditched their monarchs when they ceased to be communal. One might reflect it's a wonder we've held on to our monarchy so long in Britain when privatisation and competitive individualism are so much in the ascendant. But the crown does symbol, I think, still symbolise a commitment to public service and the communal rather than to private interest. A prime example, sadly now of course about to disappear, would be the Royal Mail. Where you have the sense that this is a public service because it has the crown and the word royal on it, now of course very sadly about to be privatised. And I think it's no coincidence that those professions which formally take an oath of allegiance and act in the name of the Queen still tend to command most respect in our society if you look at indices of respect, led of course by the armed forces. Does monarchy, though, really have the capacity to provide a focus for unity in an ever more pluralistic and indeed an ever more hedonistic society? Haven't globalisation and individualism fatally weakened collective and communal identities? Does contemporary pluralist Britain really want a centre or a focus, let alone what is an essentially spiritual one? Most of the institutions which have traditionally expressed and inculcated a sense of shared values, political parties, trade unions, voluntary groups and the churches, are in very, very marked decline. What is there to suggest that the monarchy might buck the trend and provide the new big tent that can somehow shelter people of different races, of different faiths, of different backgrounds and ages? Let me just make three concluding observations about the monarchy's potential ability to provide such a focus. The first is the extent to which both the Queen and the Prince of Wales have already themselves embodied and expressed an essentially communal ethic. In the Queen's case, I think it's been demonstrated both through her very clear one nation perspective, and one remembers her relationship, for example, with Mrs. Thatcher, her very strong personal commitment to the Commonwealth and the principles underlying it, and her increasing, very interesting embrace of all faiths and a public, well, representing her own personal and private views, but a very strong commitment not only to her own Christian faith, but to a belief that faith in general is a good rather than a bad thing. One of the things I do in the new edition of this book is analyse the content of the Queen's Christmas broadcasts, which of course have got markedly more religious in the last 10 years, markedly more personal, but also give a wonderful sense of the benevolent power of faith. In the case of the Prince of Wales, of course, it's been an overriding ideology, which James Morton has, I think, rightly characterised as communitarian, focused through speeches and philanthropic activities. Secondly, I would point to the way in which royal events and occasions still bring people together and produce a feel-good factor. Sheila Rowbottom from Manchester Metropolitan University has written extremely interesting about the way people use religious language to describe encounters with royalty, words like blessing. And I've done a lot of work of this, but there's absolutely no doubt that many people encountering royalty see it in some senses as a religious experience. There's also no doubt that it does have the capacity to bring people together. Some of you will be familiar with the pioneering work on this done by two sociologists on the basis of the 1953 coronation, where they called it, Michael Young and Edward Shields, an act of national communion, basing their assertion, and these were two very secular sociologists, but they were struck by the impact the coronation had on people speaking about it again in religious terms, the way in which it led feuding neighbours, for example, to come together, and people, families who'd been split and dislocated again to be reconciled. Just a small indication of this. I mean, it was interesting, I think, the impact that the wedding of Prince William and the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge had last year. Comments of two of those who organised street parties. People sit down and they talk, and that's what community is about, talking to each other and finding out about each other. These parties bring out the best in people. Organising it has been the most enjoyable thing I've done for a long time. And even The Guardian, my own paper of choice, I hasten to say, but not noted for its pro-monarchist sympathies, grasped this very important dimension of royal events. Writing on the day after the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's wedding, Jonathan Friedland speculated about what would live on in the nation's collective memory. And he said, when the Dean of Westminster invoked a mystical union, he surely got close to the essence both of the royal wedding and of something much larger. The literal reference was to the bond between Christ and the Church, but he could just as easily have been describing the mystical union that exists and was reinforced in spectacular style yesterday between Britain and its royal family. For what we witnessed was the mysterious alchemy that somehow converts love of country into affection for the House of Windsor. The emblem of it was the banner waved by many in the crowds, the same one that has been on display in shop windows throughout the land, a Union flag with a portrait of William and Kate at its centre. Just in parenthesis, I would say, I mean, I've spent the last week travelling around Yorkshire giving various lectures, not necessarily at all on the monarchy, but I have been enormously struck by the number of shops completely covered in Union Jacks that I've seen, by the huge number of events that are taking place really from now into Jubilee weekend. And this is as true in inner city Hull, where I've just spent the last 4 days, as it is in kind of rural Victoria, North Yorkshire. I don't think it's very true in Scotland. I'm doing my bit in St Andrews, but I think it's fair to say that Scotland won't be celebrating it with quite the éclat as either Hull or rural Yorkshire. But I mean, it's been extraordinarily striking, and for me profoundly encouraging and moving to see the number of Union Jacks out, the huge number of community things that are going on. As you know, we're all being enjoined to have a big lunch on Sunday, on the Jubilee Sunday, and it's very clear that the folk of Yorkshire, I don't know whether it's happening on this side of the Pennines, are taking that very much to heart. My final observation is just to come back to this difference between subjects and citizens. I've already noted that the British citizenship ceremony has at its heart the act of pledging allegiance to the Queen. In the context of the wider debate about patriotism and Britishness and national identity, many people have wanted to emphasise the concept of citizenship, and I think rightly and understandably so. And it's argued that we have a weak tradition of citizenship in Britain, partly because of the existence of the monarchy and the emphasis being on subjects rather than citizens. I want to just leave you with the thought that the fact of being subjects of the Queen and owing loyalty to the Crown may actually create a more tangible sense of belonging and a stronger sense of concomitant rights and responsibilities than the much more abstract and less personal status of citizenship. That's it. Thank you very much.